Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for being here. As you probably heard by now, there's been a pretty dramatic acceleration in the advance of the June 27th flow, so the timing of tonight's meeting is opportune for bringing you up to date on the latest, what we've observed, and also why we think this is happening right now. So we really appreciate you taking the time out to take part in the meeting tonight. We've seen really rapid advance over the last 36 to 48 hours or so. A very narrow flow front is advancing very quickly down a small gully. In fact, it's probably generous to call this a gully. It's a very low swale in the topography, but nonetheless, it's forcing the flow to move forward rather than spread laterally. And so that's why we're seeing this great pickup in the advance rate. There's been no significant change in the eruption rate driving this advance. It seems to be this channelization of the flow coupled with the fact that the lava tube system is now delivering more lava to the tip of the flow. So we're having more lava being delivered to the tip instead of being spread throughout the entire flow field. There's really no changes in the flow path projections. Pahoa is still in the downhill path, and the variable advance rates we've been seeing, especially over the last month or so, are likely to continue, because this is the way Pahoehoe flows really work. They grow in fits and starts. They cover over themselves. They send out little fingers like we're seeing right now that can move quite quickly and then may stagnate. So this sort of variable advance rate is quite typical, and we can expect that sort of behavior to continue. So let's get right to the map. This is from our overflight yesterday. So this is the entire flow field from Pu'uo'o all the way to right up in this area here, just above Pahoa. We'll zoom in on this area here on the lower half of the flow, and you can see in red the changes that occurred between October 20th, Monday, and yesterday, the 22nd on Wednesday. The main change was this little finger right at the tip of the flow. You can see the rest of the flow, there's not a whole lot of change that occurred, so most of the energy of this flow is now going into pushing this finger forward. And that's part of the reason that it's advancing so quickly. We tend to see these flows cover a certain amount of area per day. And if we're not seeing a lateral expansion, it's going to be pushing forward like this one's doing now. Here's a zoom in of that view. So here's Pahoa here. The high school is right over here. And there's the transfer station there. This was the tip of the flow on October 22nd, yesterday at about 2 p.m. At the time that Civil Defense did their overflight this morning, it had moved approximately 400, 450 yards forward on this very narrow finger following these flow lines. We had a crew out on the ground for much of the day today, and by about 5 p.m. it had gone another 100, 150 yards or so. So it's advancing right now at an average rate somewhere around 400 to 450 yards per day. At this rate, it would reach the Cemetery Road right here sometime tomorrow. It's unclear whether this will continue. This rate is going to be highly variable. It's solely going to depend on how much lava is being delivered to this very narrow finger. But because this finger lies in this small gully, this small swale, it's being confined and pushed forward rather than spreading out laterally. So this is a view that we got this morning from Civil Defense. The flow is over 13 miles long, and as of about 5 p.m. today, it was 0.23 miles from a road along the flow pathway that we anticipate it's going to take, which is right down through this area here. It turns out that there's actually an old berm that's hidden in the trees here that wasn't on any of the topographic maps. Looks like an old sugarcane berm that the field geologists today discovered, and so they believe that that will nudge the flow, at least initially, in this direction, and it'll cross the road somewhere in this area here. And again, that may happen as early as tomorrow if the advance rate continues at its current pace. This is what it looks like on the ground. You can see across this flow, it's very narrow. It's only, say, 20 yards wide or so at this point. And this, again, is why it's pushing forward so quickly, because it really doesn't have much lateral extent. Burning forest as you go, burning grasses here. The interior of the flow is quite molten, but the upper surfaces are completely crusted over. This is a very typical Pahoehoe lava flow. So we're not seeing any new behavior from this. This is the sort of thing we've seen happening on the Kalapana side for 31 years or so now. So what happened to create this situation here, especially in the last day or two, where we've seen this flow just rush forward? Well, if you were here last week, You'll remember that I mentioned 3 factors that tend to control how fast flows move. They were the surface slope, and that's sort of a second order effect. It's superimposed on more important processes. And those more important processes are the robustness of the lava tube, the efficiency of the lava tube, the ability to get lava from the source down to the tip of the flow. There's also the eruption rate is incredibly important. A lava flow just won't move forward that much if it doesn't get a supply of lava to feed it. What have we been seeing over the last week? Well, there's been no major change in the eruption rate. The eruption rate's been pretty steady. In fact, it's relatively low right now. But the lava tube has become much more developed. We're seeing signs that lava tube is pushing through closer and closer to the very end of the flow. So it's able to deliver lava very efficiently towards the end. And the lava is in this very small swale in topography that is preventing it from spreading laterally and pushing it forward. So I'd like to show you some information on all 3 of these points to demonstrate what we're seeing out there. Well, we know the eruption rate has remained steady because we can see it. This is a skylight. Many of you may have seen a picture like this before. This picture was taken a couple of days ago. We can see into the lava tube, and the streaks here, the orange streaks, are lava rushing by. And we can actually measure just how much lava is going through this tube up by Pu'uo'o. So we have a very good idea of how much lava is coming out of Pu'uo'o and feeding this flow, and it just doesn't appear to be on the increase. So that's not what's driving this advance. We also don't see any signs in the deformation of the volcano that there's a big push that would be coming from the eruption rate. If you were here last week, you probably heard me talk about ground tilt and how we measure ground tilt. This very esoteric unit here, microradians. A microradian, if you had a 2x4 or a beam or something that was a half a mile long, and you put a dime under one end of it, right? You'd create some tilt. The whole thing would tilt ever so slightly. That amount of tilt is equivalent to 1 microradian, and we can measure many times smaller than that. So we can detect these very subtle changes in the shape of the volcano and tie that to eruptive activity. When the volcano's inflating, it tends to mean there's more magma coming in and more to feed the lava. When the volcano's deflating, it tends to mean that there's less lava available to the flow to feed that advance. Well, since September 1st, here's what our tilts has looked like at the summit right up to today. When this line goes up, it's inflating. When the line goes down, the summit's deflating. Last week, we were right there at the bottom of this little deflationary pulse, and now we've recovered that. But it's not a fantastic amount of inflation. So the amount of lava that's available to erupt based on the summit sort of pushing it out there is not spectacular. It's not a tremendous increase like we were seeing a couple of weeks ago, way up there. But we are nevertheless inflating subtly. We do, however, see a much more important focusing of flow activity towards the distal tip of the flow. Now, this is a satellite image that shows heat signatures superimposed on essentially a picture of the lava flow field. Pu'uo'o is right here, and the June 27th flow traces down there, and Pahoa is right in here. This particular image is from October 5th, and wherever you see red is hot. Of course, there's a lot of red down here by the end of the flow field, but you'll also see there's quite a lot scattered up here in the very middle of the flow field. This is an image that was acquired 2 days ago, on the 21st, Tuesday. There's now almost no activity in the middle of the part of the flow field. One small outbreak, which actually we observed was no longer active yesterday, and a tremendous amount now focused at the flow front. So all of that energy, all of those breakouts, all of that lava is now feeding the distal portion of the flow. It's not being spread out over a larger area. We can see the lava tube as well. This is a thermal camera image, so it essentially shows heat. Warmer colors mean warmer temperatures. This particular image is close to Pu'uo'o, and what you can see in there, in this cooling lava, is this sort of snaky, hot, sinuous thing here. That's the lava tube. We can actually see the heat signature of the buried lava tube at the surface. We hadn't observed anything like this towards the end of the flow, but that's changed in the last couple of days. This is a view of where the lava is coming out of the crack system and heading off this direction towards the end of the flow field. And now we can see the beginnings of a lava tube. There's a little breakout of lava there. The tube extends through here and then splits. We hadn't seen this before. So now it appears that there is a lava tube that's becoming quite efficient, robust, on the lower part of the flow field. And this means it's able to deliver more lava towards the end of the flow. As evidence of this delivery system and how it's working, we can look at a thermal image of the end of the flow. This was acquired yesterday from the helicopter. And if you've been watching these sorts of presentations over the last few weeks, you've known that over this last, say, mile or two of the lava flow, there's been all kinds of breakouts, right? There's been warm colors everywhere. And you'll notice in this image, there's still a few, but there's not near as many as there used to be. And instead, there's a huge concentration of warm colors right towards the tip of the flow. And this is that rapidly advancing narrow finger of lava that's gotten into that small topographic swale. So all of this activity seems to be focusing at the flow front, and that's what's providing the energy for this flow to push forward. The gully is impossible to see. Even if you're on the ground, it's very difficult to make out through all the vegetation. But here's that finger of lava, and it's following that small swale and topography right through here. And the only reason we can identify this little swale is because we've been out there on the ground and used our own eyes, and even then it's very difficult to pick this up. This was an image that was sent to us by a geologist in the field today. 2 p.m. he took this photo. This is the flow advancing through the vegetation. It's impossible to see any topography in there. And that's what the flow looks like right now, where it's burning through the forest. So the topography it's feeling is very subtle, but it is having an effect on channelizing this flow, on directing it downslope and keeping it from spreading laterally, at least for the moment. I'd like to flip through a sequence of these maps now to show you how this has developed over the last 2.5 weeks or so. So this is that familiar satellite image with Pahoa right there, and there's the transfer station. And what you're going to see as I flip through this are a sequence of images where this flow advances down the flow line here towards Cemetery Road. So this is what the situation looked like on October 6th. There it is on the 8th. The red is the new since the previous map. On the 10th, we're starting to see it spread out laterally. On the 13th, it had a small surge forward, but it's continuing to push laterally. The 15th, 17th, 20th, and yesterday. So I'll just flip through that so you can see how it developed. This finger right there, that's the main locus of advancement right now, has actually been advancing along the southeast side of the lava flow for several days now, quite quickly. So it seemed to have gotten some push and used the pre-existing flow as sort of a buttress and followed that until it got in the clear and then has been moving on its own. To bring this fully up to date, that's about where the flow is now, where it's advanced over the past day or so, since our map was made on the 22nd. And then just for reference, that's the area of the flow back on September 19th. So in the last month, we've seen a lot of widening of this flow field and then a real push over the last day. So what's next? What's likely to come, and what are we doing in response to this? Trying to forecast the advance rates is a difficult proposition because there's so many variables that go into this, and obviously we've seen it advance from 400 yards a day to 0 in the span of just a couple of days. So the forecast of advance rates becomes really problematic. Two things really cause this. One is really small-scale topography, because lava flows can feel this topography and be confined by this small swale. The other thing is that lava flows actually create their own topography. It's not like water, and it just goes down a gully and then it's gone. The lava flow actually builds topography up, so that small gully is gone where the lava flow has passed through it. So any subsequent lava that comes back over and recovers this flow that's pushed forward will not see a gully. Instead, it may see actually a high point created by this flow that's moving through there now. So topography is a real issue because very small scale things can have a big effect, and then the topography you used to have is wrong the second the flow goes through there because it changes it fundamentally. The other thing we're seeing is a lot more supply to the flow front, and the more lava that gets pushed to the very edge of the flow, the more this thing is going to move forward. And especially if you're not spreading laterally, this thing is going to have to move forward. So these are the two variables that are really causing us problems with forecasting advance rates. The topography, which is ever changing out there, and this supply of lava to the flow front, which is varying on a daily basis. We're doing a lot of work, though, to keep this thing in check in terms of informing you what's happening. Both the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory and Hawaii County Civil Defense are going to be continuing overflights, of course, to track the overall eruptive activity of the entire flow field. We'll also be conducting ground-based observations of the flow. We had field crews out measuring advance rates and looking at small-scale topography to see if they could better forecast which way the flow would go as it passed through. They were out in the field for much of the day today, and we'll be back again tomorrow through the weekend as we watch this thing develop and try to understand which way it's going and how it's moving. And finally, all of the updates and information that we can, both from Civil Defense and from the Volcano Observatory, we posted on our websites. So if you'd like information and status updates as we get new information, it'll be posted online there. So, just to reiterate the situation today, we've had this very rapid advance, especially over the last day or two, of the June 27th flow. It's a very narrow flow front that's moving down a very shallow gully. There's been no change in the eruption rate. So it's really the lava tube getting more efficient and this small-scale topography controlling the flow. The paths below the flow front are unchanged. We still forecast that this will cross Cemetery Road in the vicinity of the cemetery, and the pathways through Pahoa are unchanged. These variable advance rates that we've seen over the last month are going to continue.